Look how they live in luxury while our African people, them suffer us. How you strategize all your lies, saw blood, sweat, and tears that built your empire. The system was designed for I and I to never rise, only bleed to fulfill your desires. I was born with both hands on my heart from Mama Africa.
It's time for liberation. Mama Africa awaits a revolution. This is the time for meditation. Free up your mind from the lies and illusions. This is the time for liberation. Come make we stand up and start a revolution. In these are times of elevation. Have you keep your head above all pollution. Revolution in the air. My people prepare. No more African children have to shed no tear. Full time be aware. Babylon no sincere after all. Who has sent the guns them out here? Spiritual warfare. They may rage on the people like they don't care. The world we live in is unfair. Yet a victim mentality won't take us nowhere.
Blessed love, Rastafari. We're here with a very esteemed guest. He is the president of the Rastafari United Front, the deputy chairman of the Rastafari Continental Council, the national chairman of the Rastafari Ganja Council, the crown general commander of the Rastafari Army in Africa by the Mpese royal family in Ghana installment ceremony, the Grand Master of the Order of Bake Hase, which is the Bantu of Kadamawi Haile Selassie, the Bantu-based Order of Rastafari, which is not Bible-based, and also he's the chairman of the Rastafari Supreme Council of South Africa. His name is General ThauThau. Honorable, how are you today?
Greetings in the name of His Majesty Kadamawi Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Kadamawi Itegemenen, and greetings in the name of the glorious movement, Rastafari movement globally, at home and abroad, and greetings to you too, Rasja Daniel, and the listeners, everyone at home and abroad. I greet you all in the name of His Majesty. Well, I'm doing well. I'm doing well today. I'm very happy. His Majesty blessed me with another son this morning, which make all my sons total to 8 sons and 9 daughters. So I give thanks for life, give thanks for liberty. Rastafari is the Almighty.
Yes, I blessed love. That's quite a bit of children, and that's a very big blessing. You know, they say, happy is the children are like arrows, and happy is the man that has his quiver full of them, you know. So as we raise them with the right teaching and discipline, and we pray that they will be productive members of society, you know. So, you know, give thanks for the blessing of the new life in the family, Rastafari. So going through, it's good to have you again on the show. I just wanted to, you know, continue the reasoning that we've begun, and more so to get an understanding of the Rastafari movement in your region in South Africa. We know that South Africa, as you said in the last reasoning, that it has 57 Nyabingi tabernacles, and that's just the Nyabingi house alone, which means there's a very large population of Rastafari there. So we would just like to get some information, you know, firsthand from the eye about, I would just like you, you know, explain a little bit about how the Rastafari movement sprang up in South Africa, and like when did it happen? What was the social climate at the time when it did spring up? Like anything that contributed to the Rastafari movement becoming such a powerful force in South Africa. If you could just give us a bit of information on that, General ThauThau.
I give thanks to Daniel and the listeners. If we can recall, the patriarch, the founder of the Rastafari movement in Jamaica, Gangu Guru Marak, Leonard Howell, He stated, and as is also witnessed by the Hawalite, he stated that the seeds of Rastafari come from Kimberley in South Africa. And when we trace that, is that as early as 1918, 1919, the first Secretary General of the African National Congress, the ANC, which is now the ruling party in South Africa, Mr. Sol Plaatje, used to distribute the Marcus Garvey newspaper called the Negro World among the diamond diggers in Kimberley. There's a historical connection and similarities between Kimberley and the Panama Canal. These are one of the two man-made holes or whatever it is created by men on earth, but also it became the place where there was a convergence of revolutionaries, radicals, rebels from all over. In the case of Kimberley, there's convergence of radicals, revolutionaries, and rebels from the Southern Africa, from what they call the SADC, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Gambia, and so forth. So these people, they established a church called the Hermetic Church, or the Church of the Children of Ham, or the other name for it is the Asli Afro Construction Church, AACC. Now, this church was based on the Holy Piby, the black man's Bible. So they used to read this black man's Bible until in the early 1920s, I think 1926, 1924, the Union of South Africa. What people don't understand is that South Africa was the USA before it became an RSA. Before it became Republic of South Africa, it was Union of South Africa, the USA. Now, the Union of South Africa banned the Holy Piby, dragged the movement underground, and accused its leaders with sedition that they are preaching the doctrine of the Black God. These are the early stages that connect the Africans at home and diaspora with common thought that came through the publication of Marcus Garvey's Negro World, the distribution of the Holy Piby, actually what they call the Big Piby, because up to so far what is being discovered, and there was a big celebration, I think, around the year 2000, when Carol Yoni, Jake Sohomiak, and their colleagues at the Smithsonian Institute came to South Africa and went to Nyambani Street by Mr. Joseph Masucha's house, where it was claimed that there is a trunk full of old documents, including the Big Piby. But what they did manage to discover is a small Piby that is in circulation with few pages. But we are told that there is a Big Piby as thick as the Bible that is still kept in South Africa. And now when you go to the Africa Institute in South Africa, we went there around 2004, 2003 with Jalnoid. There is His Majesty's grandson, Prince Stephanos, Delroy Morgan, the father of the Morgan Heritage Youth. There was a huge delegation after some diaspora African meeting hosted in Jamaica, where then the president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, attended, and then the elders of Rastafari engaged with him, talked to him, and then he agreed to sponsor their trip to South Africa and to Africa, actually, because when they reached here, we moved around with them, and then after they are done with their local mission around, they went to Mozambique to meet Joaquim Chissano, who was then the president of Mozambique and the chairman of the African Union, and then went ahead to Libya to meet Muammar Gaddafi. But then when they were here, we went with them to the Africa Institute. So the Africa Institute have this document, which is documenting the interviews of Leonard Howell and the Howellites, where the Howellites stated that Leonard Howell used to tell them that the seed of Rastafari come from Kimberley in South Africa among the diamond diggers who in the 1920s had a church called the Hermetic Church, or the Afro Construction Church, which was based on a doctrine coming out of a book called the Black Man's Bible, or the Holy Piby. So that is the earliest that the Rastafari movement connection can be traced. But then we go to the 1960s, 1960 in particular, that in 1957, the whites went and killed some couple of kings in KwaZulu, in the land of the Zulus, over ganja. They call it Impienza, the war of ganja, the war of cannabis, where the whites were fighting cannabis and the kings were trying to defend that. So we are told that the subsequent Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where 21st March, where about 69 Africans were killed brutally by the apartheid regime, which was basically protesting that, and then that the early Rastafari were in there. But also we are told by a man who was once a president of South Africa for about 8 months, and who went on to become the deputy president of South Africa for about 5 years, Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe, who told us that in 1963, when Nelson Mandela and the Rivonia trialists, those who were sentenced to life with him in prison, when they were sentenced to life in prison, most of them, they refused to cut their hair, and they grow their hair in dreadlocks as a protest and solidarity with the leaders that were imprisoned. Then Rastafari, as we know it today with the name Rastafari, with reverence to His Majesty Haile Selassie, with probably a lot of mimicking of traditions and cultures coming out of Jamaica, and the reggae music began officially, as far as we hear, in 1974, 1975, with a visit of Jimmy Cliff. Jimmy Cliff came and performed in Soweto in 1975. He was the first reggae artist while there was still a cultural ban on apartheid, where artists did not want to come and play in South Africa in their solidarity against the apartheid regime. So most of our elders whom we currently have around the country, they trace the genesis of the movement from that particular event in Soweto at Jabulani, where Jimmy Cliff came to perform. But also they're telling us that some of them, when they go to that reggae festival, majority of them were already dreadlocked, were already draping the green, gold, and red colors, and were already hailing His Majesty Haile Selassie as their God and King. So then what accounts to the largest population of Rastafari in South Africa, that today we have about 3 million Rastafari and more, is the severity of apartheid oppression. Apartheid oppression, it was so severe. I mean, the revolutionaries around here, particularly those who are coming from the Marxist point of view, they characterize our oppression as CST, colonialism of a special type. That is different from the colonialism in the rest of Africa, in a sense that the colonialists and the colonialized were living in the same place. Remember, here in South Africa is the only place where you have a set of white people who claim to have originated in Africa. We call them the Boers. They call themselves the Afrikaners, the people who were in charge of the apartheid machinery. So Afrikaners were basically saying that they are Africans. They are Europeans who originate in Africa. Their language is a mixture of Dutch and so forth, but it is South African. The language that the Boers, which is the Europeans, are speaking in South Africa is not spoken anywhere in Europe. They develop it here in South Africa. So we say they are homemade. But the only Europeans that we made them here, we manufactured them here in South Africa. So now our difference in our colonialism and the rest of the colonialism that took place in Africa is that some places were ruled from Britain, from Belgium, from France, from all these other colonial powers, capitals of the world. But in the case of the Boers, they were here. They had the Laga mentality, the Great Trek mentality, the Afrikaner mentality. They developed their own culture, which is European culture that is not practiced anywhere in Europe, but only here in Africa, and originated here in South Africa. So therefore, they call themselves Afrikaner, and their language is called Afrikaans. And the very cause of the 1976 Soweto student uprising is that the students were protesting against the imposition of the Afrikaans language, which is the Boers language, to be the medium of instruction, and everything we should be taught, it should be in that particular language. So it is defined locally as the language of the oppressor. Although they are not the only one who speak it, we have what we call colored. I know in America the colored is everyone who is black, but in South Africa the colored is those who are racially mixed. Between the blacks and the whites. We call them colored. So you have blacks, you have colored, you have Indians, you have white. So these were the four major racial groups that Apartheid divided them and created what they call Group Areas Act, whereby we are grouped. Black people, they stay in black locations like Soweto, Danzani, Seshego, Mlazi, and so forth. And then the Indians, they'll have their own Indian location. In the context of my area, they have a place they call it Bivana, that's an Indian location. And then the colors have their own place called Westernburg. And then we have our own place which is further away from town. And also these places, they also allocated according to proximity to town. The white men, they are in town. The Indians, they are next to town. The colored, they are next to the Indians. And the black people are far away from town. Because the white men who stole things from us, our land and everything, they always believe that we're going to steal the things back. So they try to keep us away as far as possible. So therefore, the evolution of the Rastafari movement is a result of the Great Oppression. When you are oppressed so much, you adopt every and any liberation theology and liberation theory and liberation philosophy. So we had the liberation theology. We have African nationalism, which the ANC is the embodiment of that. We had the South African Communist Party, and then we have the Black Consciousness Movement, which Steve Biko is the most famous poster boy of that, of the Black Consciousness Movement. And then we have the pan-Africanist movement, which was founded by Robert Sobukwe, who broke away from the ANC. And then you have the Rastafari movement, which was also grouped with the rest of, it was banned like the rest of the political organizations. When the political organizations were banned in South Africa, Rastafari was also a banned movement, a prohibited movement. Today when we talk about it, we say ganja, it is illegal in South Africa, but not Rastafari, because the South African Constitution recognized Rastafari as one of the 7 constitutionally recognized religions in South Africa. So there's nothing major that takes place in South Africa without involving the Rastafari, whether it's the social cohesion programs, whether it's the 16 days of activism against women and children, whether it is the interfaith movement, whatever happens, more time you will see me representing the Rastafari community going to pray in the interfaith system, where a Muslim, a Christian, an African traditionalist, a Rastafari, a Buddhist, we all come together, the 7 recognized religions and faith in the system we call the interfaith. So the oppression, the level of oppression, I think is responsible for the greatest amount of the Rastafari, because then some opted for politics, some opted for resisting through Rastafari, and that came through also largely through reggae music, but also with the visitation of the Rastafari elders like Elder Jabulani, who's been coming in South Africa in the 80s. At one time, the apartheid government banned him, and then he then went to stay in Zimbabwe. And then from there in 1992, he came and established the Nyabingi Order in South Africa. And then in 1996, was Bonagis Kongowato came and established the Nyabingi Order officially. But before that, there was the 12th tribe of Israel. that was established through reggae music, as you will recall. The Bob Marley LPs, reggae LPs, they always have some messages, they always have some things about the 12 tribe of Israel, the month, the allocation of months, that if you're born of this month, therefore you are Reuben, you are Judah, you are Simeon, you are Levi, and so forth. So the 12 tribe of Israel became the oldest organized formation, but before that, it was just Rasta, who would listen to the music, identify with the global struggle. And then towards the year 2000, between 1998 and 2000, Bobo Asante was introduced through Sizzla Kalonji's music, through Capleton's music, through many ones who were professing the Bobo faith. But then around 2002, 3, 4, we started to have the Bobo priests like Priest Maddock, Priest Anva, Honorable Anva, Maddock. I think there were about 7 honorables who came from abroad and then began to establish the Bobo Shanti officially. But also at the same time, we evolved indigenous way of practicing Rastafari based on the amalgamation of our culture. Like, for instance, Rastafari, when it came to us from the West, it came without a few important things, like the rites of burial. How do we bury? So they used to just say, let the dead bury the dead. And we find that that is un-African, that is not biblical, that is not even Ethiopian, because His Majesty buried his children, His Majesty buried his wife, and then in the Bible, everybody else got buried. King David moved behind the coffin of his son Absalom and chanted barefoot. And in Ethiopia, basically, if I have a serious fight and I want to curse you, I will say to you as Jadamiel, please don't come to my funeral. So I exclude you from my life and even from my death. So in Africa here, there are 3 main rituals that we observe. The ritual of birth, the ritual of marriage, and the rituals of death. On Friday, I will be going to officiate over a burial of another Rastaman who passed away last week, Wednesday. So we do bury. So we find that the Naya Bingi Bobo Shanti tribe, when it came from the West and come to Africa here, it did not came up with clear provisos as to explain how do you bury, how do you marry. We have a system we call Lobola. You must go and pay the dowry, what they call the bride price. That is now anthropologists and sociologists, but it's not a price because we are saying a woman cannot be bought. So we have a tradition that a man does not finish marrying. If you're going to visit your mother-in-law, you must always go there carrying something. So you keep on marrying every day. You keep on renewing your vows. So there's no end to this particular process. But there's an official process whereby the elders, my uncles, I have to send them to my wife's family, and then they go and ask officially a hand in marriage. But also it's a traditional way of connecting the ancestors. Because in Africa here, we believe that a child comes from the ancestors. That is why in our traditional African societies, we never had a thing called an illegitimate child or an unwanted pregnancy or offense. We don't have that. It's not part of our cultural society. We say it actually takes the whole village to grow a child. So it takes everybody in the village to get involved in the growth of a child. Like the next man in the village is your uncle, is your father, is your brother. So there is no orphan, there's no illegitimate child. In my Bapedi culture, we have a name for God. We call God Khobe. So when a woman is, we call Khobe, Kgobe, is our ancient name for God. So when a woman is pregnant, is referred to as Mutua Khobe. She's the person of God, meaning to say, in my culture, all pregnancies are considered to be immaculate conception. They are considered to be the divine pregnancy. There is no unwanted child because a child does not come from man and woman. A child comes from the ancestors. They only come through us. They don't come from us. So we're just in conduit that bring them to earth, but we are not the ones that really will them to earth is the ancestors. You ask the ancestors. If a woman is barren, you then ask the ancestors to open the womb, because a child is a gift of the ancestors. A child is a gift of God. A child is a gift of the Great Spirit. So now, in this particular context, you find that Naya Bingi, the Bobo Shanti, the 12 tribes did not provide us a clear proviso as to how do we deal with these most important things to us as Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is with those who came in also to spread Rastafari and also their local representatives. They did exactly what the 18th and 19th century missionaries did. They come in here with Rastafari as a new faith, a new doctrine that look down on the African culture and demonize African culture. To tell you the honest truth, our diaspora version of Rastafari, it is anti-African. This African youth who start up Rastafari and begin to profess Rastafari, they demonize the African culture. They behave like the 18th and the 19th century mercenaries who came here to tell Africans that the African culture is demonic and so forth. Now, situations like this are going to naturally cause reaction. Rastafari is what we are. Bantu is who we are. African is who we are. Our languages come from our mothers. They are called our mother tongue, because it's something we come with from our mother's breast. So there are certain things in us that is going to resist this particular tyranny that is coming in the name of God, in the name of orthodoxy, in the name of religion. So therefore, this intolerant version of Rastafari, which we then characterize it as basically Christafari, not Rastafari, because the exponents of it, they are using Christ to rationalize Tafari. So they're telling us that Rastafari, Haile Selassie, is Christ in his kingly character. They're telling us that the Haile Selassie the first is Jesus the second. Now this thing creates contradictions, because we say, how can Haile Selassie the first become Jesus the second? How do you want to tell us that Haile Selassie is the pure imitation of Jesus Christ? You're telling us that Haile Selassie is Jesus without dreadlocks, is Jesus without miracles and so forth. Now these things, they pose a serious fundamental contradictions if you are steeped and deeply grounded in African sacred royalty. The idea that God is king, it is older than the Jamaican concept of Rastafari. It is as old as the African continent. You know, the pharaohs were worshipped as gods on earth in their kingly character. And the Kabakas, the Hoshi, all of these things. So these things, for us, most of us, it is easier to relate to His Majesty's divinity from our African cultural point of view than from the biblical point of view. So therefore, that kind of attitude created a reaction. Then in 2000, we established the Melchizedek Order of Rastafari, which I was responsible for that, as a ceremonial order to incorporate certain ceremonies that are absent, like marriage, burial, cleansing, washing of the feet, and so forth. And then you then had the Mau Mau Order of Rastafari, the Mau Mau Order of Naya Bingi, which was the Naya Bingi order that rejected the Bible. And then you had the Order of Bake Hase. Ba, it is the Bantu Ba, or the Egyptian Ba, which means the soul, the people. Like we say, Bakongo, Banyarwanda, Baluba, Basutu, Batswana. So the Bantu people make up 75% of Africa's population, and they are identified by prefixing themselves with Ba, Bakongo, Baluba, Banyarwanda, Baganda, Bachwezi. The people who came up with Nyabingi, they are called Bachwezi. We come out of the Bachwezi people of Uganda. So now we say Ba, which means the people or the soul of, and then Kehase is the abbreviations of the name of His Majesty that he signed his own signature. Is K for Kadamawi, Ha for Haile, K for Selassie. When we say Bake Hase, we simply say the people of Haile Selassie. It's like when we say Rastafarians. Rastafarians is English, Bake Hase is Bantu. But they're saying the same thing, the people of His Majesty Haile Selassie, Kadamawi Haile Selassie Bakehase. So I'm the founder of that order, of course, and then we absolutely reject the Bible. We based ourselves on the Bantu base, it's not Bible based. So we're basing ourselves on African spirituality, African ontology, African cosmology. Like Rastafari, what became really too much of contradiction to us that every time we are told that Rastafari is a movement that is returning us back to the roots and culture, our roots and culture. Now we think that our roots and culture are not in Israel. These are the things that we come to address. Most of the things that people will claim them, like they will say, the Bible is African. I always ask which tribe among the 3,000 Bantu tribes, which tribe wrote the Bible? Oh, Jesus was African. From which tribe? Was he a Zulu? Was he a Xhosa? Was he Amhara in Ethiopia? No. So how is it that these people are Africans? Because they were dark skinned? Oh no, the Bible says he was having a woolen hair, a skin like brass, and eyes like flames of fire. But those are the same characteristics of Gaddafi. And Gaddafi was not an African, was an Arab. Gaddafi was having an afro hair, was having a dark skin, and was having eyes like us. Because of the sun in the desert, your eyes become reddish. Understand? So now we question this thing that you can't just say because of the council, one of the councils that formulated the Bible congregated in North Africa, in Alexandria, so therefore the Bible is African. I mean, apartheid was formed in South Africa, but apartheid is not African. So Christianity was established in Alexandria, but during the time, Alexandria was not even ruled by Africans. It was first conquered by the Romans and then the Greeks. That is why it's called Alexandria, because it was named after Alexander the Great. That's why we're told of the Alexandria Library. Just like we will go around and celebrate the history of Timbuktu and Sankore University. But those are Arab civilization in Africa. The Timbuktu manuscripts, the more than 400 Timbuktu manuscripts are all written in Arabic. That's like most people who will say South Africa is Azania. And we ask them, which tribe in South Africa is the name Azania come from? Who are the tribe of the Azanians? It is not South African. It's an Arab name, which means the land is the land of the Azania, which is an Arab name, just like Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a Greek name. It's not our name. It means the land of the sunburnt people. So it's the Greeks who called us that way, that we are sunburnt people. We have our own self-definition. Like, for instance, in Zulu, up until 1973, within the Zulu vocabulary, there was never a word called black men. The Zulu never defined themselves as black. They would say black man in Zulu is umuntu omnyama. But then before 1973, they never called themselves umuntu omnyama. They would say umuntu omunsundu. We refer to ourselves as dark brown people or golden people, as they say Nubians. Nubian means gold. So we never call ourselves black. Now when we say umuntu omnyama, black men, is when we Africanized colonialism and translate it into our languages to make it sound African, which is not African. So we have a lot of proverbs and idioms like that. One of the idioms is like the black man's medicine is a white man. Now we ask ourselves that before the white man came into Africa, who was our medicine? Who was the black man's medicine? So some of these things is when colonialism is translated into African languages and colonialism is Africanized and spoken in African languages, but it has not necessarily a direct translation of what we said and what we define ourselves. So it's a long process of colonization, which is they did not only colonize spaces, they did not only colonize land, they did not colonize human mineral resources. White men also colonized ideas, concepts, and principles that we are using. That is why it is so much dangerous for black people to use European concepts to define African phenomena.
And that's why we're here right now having this conversation, because, you know, I is someone who is familiar with not only your original African culture, but also the process of colonialism, as you're able to so greatly articulate for us to understand. Because like as I'm listening, there's a lot that I'm learning. You know, I don't know a lot about some of the concepts that you've presented here because it's just not in books. Because you know, traditionally we don't really write books. So
Yes,
now
we are an oral tradition.
yes, I. So give thanks that the I is able to, you know, expound upon these things to clarify for us in the West. Because, like for instance, when you mention burial, the ceremonies, like the Bobo Shanti House is a ceremonial order. I mean, everything is a ceremony for like the service and all of these things. But as you said, burial and marriage and things we don't really have. We do have a ceremony for what they call christening babies. We call it delegating the children. But as far as death and things, that we don't. The reason why we don't have it is because the only option that we know is a Bible-based version and the Christian style. We don't know the original ways that we used to do it before we came over here. So this conversation is so very important because Rastafari really has to get to a level where we can deal with our own ceremonies. I mean, I would not want to be buried by a Christian. I'd rather be burned. I'd rather have my flesh burned than to be buried in any other tradition other than the tradition that I identify with, because, you know, that would be just contrary to my life, you know. So I wanted to, you know, go over what you said so far so that the listening audience can internalize the information, you know, because it is a lot that you just said. So let's kind of summarize a little bit. So from the origin of the Rastafari movement in Southern Africa, you correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to try to recap what you said. But originally, because of the imperialists that were there was already the anti-colonial mentality among the people. And then the Universal Negro Improvement Association newspaper, the Black World, had become circulated amongst the population as well, which was helping to the connection to the other Africans in the world who were also going through colonialism on a different front. And so that gave a sense of solidarity within the struggle. And then the Holy Piby also made its way over on the continent and was also circulated but was repressed by the apartheid government. Am I right?
Yes. Basically, what we have here, Jadaniel and the listeners, is that in South Africa, we had Ethiopianism before pan-Africanism. Ethiopianism is older than pan-Africanism. Remember, pan-Africanism was conceptually introduced in 1900 by Sylvester Stanley Williams from Trinidad. But this is the same man who did spend some time in South Africa. He did come and do some studies here in South Africa. But before that, in the 19th century, we began with a man called Nehemiah Tige. Around 1887, he established the Tembu Church. Now, the Tembu is a tribe which Nelson Mandela came from among the Xhosa people. So they first encountered discrimination and segregation within the churches that were established by the missionaries. Remember, when we say Ethiopia was never colonized, we don't literally mean Africa was colonized and completely subjugated. Otherwise, we wouldn't be still retaining our languages. We wouldn't be still having all these memories. We fought wars of resistance in different stages. There was the 100 Years Xhosa Frontier War between the British and the Xhosa people, which is Mandela's people, which began in 1799 to 1899. And then there was resistance wars generally all around King Mutshekwe, King Sekhukhune. So we've always been resisting. After they defeated us because we were using inferior weapons like spears. So they introduced their missionary education system. Within the missionary system, the battle took another particular shape. And then one of the shape that it took was now the battle was taking place in the Christian churches. Now, when the Dalinyebo, the king of the Tembu people, went for his initiation, which they go to the mountain, you do your initiations, you are taught about the ways of manhood, and then you get circumcised in the process. Now, when he was returning from his circumcision, Nehemiah Tile, who was then a preacher, a black preacher in the white churches that the missionaries were establishing all over South Africa. And remember that Christianity was a soft arm of colonialism. It was the advanced forces of colonialism. They were like spies of colonialism getting into communities in the name of Jesus and so forth, but to spy so that the main forces will come in. You can follow the pattern of that history throughout Southern Africa and throughout everywhere we were colonized. They started first with the missionaries and their Bible, and they teach us to pray with our eyes closed. When we open them, they have the land, and then we are looking at the sky. So now they criticized him for contributing a bull for the sacrifice of the initiation of Dalinye. So he decided to break up from that, from the Anglican Church, and he established the Tembu Church. And he said, as the King of England is the head of the English Church, so the King of the Xhosa is the head of the Tembu Church. So he established the Tembu Church in 1888. But then there was a major move. It was a bit ethnical because it was among the ethnic group of the Xhosa people. But then in 1892, there was a big seminar, a conference of the Wesley Church or Methodist Church in Pretoria. Then a man by the name of Mangena Mage Mukoni, or commonly known as Mangena Mukoni, him and his followers, they broke out of that church and walked out and established what then became known as the Ethiopian Church of South Africa. I'll send you one of the pictures I took with those churches. They are very small buildings. They were established in 1892. They're all written there, established in 1892. I took a photo with one of them. One of them is in Soweto, and then the other one, there are a couple of them in Soweto, and there's another one in Kimberley, next to where the Church of the Holy Piby was. So there was this Ethiopian church. Now these people, when they walk out of there, they begin to cite scriptures that talk about the Garden of Eden is in Ethiopia. Moses married an Ethiopian wife, Numbers 12, Genesis 2, verse 10. Ethiopia stretched forth its hands unto God. Basically, they noted that Ethiopia is mentioned more than 40 times in the Bible. And Egypt is mentioned more than 50 times in the Bible. But Britain, where the London missionaries, or France, where the Paris missionaries, or any of those European countries where these missionaries came from, they are not even mentioned once in the Bible. So therefore, they established the Ethiopian movement and worked out of there. So the Ethiopian movement was a religio-political protest movement. It was a religious inspired, but it was political in the sense that it was challenging and questioning racism that is practiced in the church. That if you're telling us that we are equal before the eyes of God in heaven, how is it that on earth black people have to sit one side in the church and white people sit one side? So there was discrimination. There were the same thing they were using during Apartheid, that black people enter through a certain door, white people enter through a certain door. Their sitting arrangement is different, the preaching is different, they had to have their own black preachers and so forth. So they begin to question the whole thing, and they establish what they call them the Ethiopian movement. Now, the Ethiopian movement gave birth to many things like the Black Hebrews of South Africa, of the Bullhoek Massacre of 1921 under Enoch Mugijima, the African National Congress, the ANC, the founders of the ANC were in the Ethiopianism. And if you look at also the founders of these churches, ZCC, Shembe, all these black Christianity, the African Christianity that they evolved here, they somehow dress up like His Majesty or Emperor Menelik, because when they were identifying with Ethiopia, that is before pan-Africanism. That is before 1900. So we had Ethiopianism in South Africa before pan-Africanism of 1900. So most of, if we are going to document Ethiopian movements, Rastafari is a culmination of all that which began before it. There were other movements in South Africa which were already talking about the God of Ethiopia. Ethiopia will stretch forth its hands unto God. The Ethiopians are mentioned in the Bible more than the Europeans. Basically, we're the same people they talk about in the Bible. So there was this idea already brewing up among African Christians and converted Africans who could not separate themselves from the doctrine of the Bible and the history within as narrated in the Bible, like the Ethiopians. So they were the troubadours. They were the pioneers of the Ethiopian movement until it was surpassed by pan-Africanist movement, which was more political. But all pan-Africanists from Sylvester Williams, Marcus Garvey, Robert Sobukwe, anyone I can think of, all pan-Africanists are virtually Christian.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. So basically, the seed of Rastafari was planted by those conditions that began making references to Ethiopia probably 50 years before the crowning of His Majesty.
Yes, I. So if I may, I'm gonna stop you there for a moment, and because that brings us, where I was coming to. So the point that I was gonna make is that it seems from what you explained that the uprising of Rastafari in the southern African region is very much organic and not like you explained a little bit that once the music came in, the reggae music, there became a little bit more imitation of Jamaican culture. But until that point, you already had a Rastafari movement that sprung on its own. In a sense, I mean, it wasn't isolated, but you had all of the elements like the dreadlocks, the pan-Africanism, the Ethiopianism, all of those things already were existing in South Africa before reggae music made its way there, right? And so
yes,
the reggae music helped to make a connection, though, with the rest of the victims of imperialism and colonialism in a cultural way, more so.
Yeah, remember, Daniel, this is what Rastafari also say, whether in Jamaica or anywhere, they will tell the Rastafari is African. Because the Rastafari are the Africans who were taken out of Africa by force. Slaves were not taken from Africa. Africans were taken from Africa. People were taken from Africa and made slaves.
Yes, sir.
But these are people who left with a memory. They did not completely forgot. You heard about Congo people and the Baganda people and so forth who went into the West. Now, what reggae music does in this process, because dreadlocks you find dreadlocks in all African cultures, maybe popularized by the Mau Mau, but the Maasai have dreadlocks, the Karamazong have dreadlocks, our Sangomas have dreadlocks, the Mapala in my culture, you had a group of people called Mapala who were eating certain plants, who were very highly spiritual, who were dreadlocked and so forth. So the dreadlock culture was long established. The ganja smoking culture was long established. You have in every culture, you'll have even the Xhosa women with their long pipes that they were using to smoke ganja with. The ancient kuchu pipe, the ancient chalice that they were using. So we talk about the red, gold, and green. At one time, I think during the formation of the OAU in 1963, and up until to about 1970, 75, you had about 36 African countries had their flags as red, gold, and green, turned upside down. Rwanda one will be having R in it, but all of them, they had the red, gold, and green. So at one time, red, gold, and green was the national flag of Africa in most African countries. I mean, in a continent of 54 countries and of 36 countries having red, gold, and green, you can understand the majority is red, gold, and green.
Yes, sir.
And then in all the Bantu cultures, almost every culture have a dreadlock culture. Is either a something that is grown by the warriors, or is something that is grown by the traditional healers, or is something that is grown by the spiritualists or the traditionalists like the griots, their storytellers, their wood carvers, and so forth. But the dreadlocks was very particular. It belongs to a particular set of people, a particular order of people.
Yes, sir.
And then you also have elements of vegetarianism, which most African cultures were plant-based cultures. Even if you have cows, the fact that your grandfather had 1,000 cows did not necessarily mean to say you were eating meat every day. Meat was eaten probably 3 times a year, during the wedding feast or during a big ceremony, but it was not something that people were just eating every day. So they were mainly plant-based culture. They're eating maize, they're eating their greens, their different type of greens, their roots, their cassavas. Like you go to Tanzania, you look at the things that they eat there, they're almost like Jamaica's tropical country, where like 90% of what they eat is plant-based, and meat play 10%. That would be like the chicken, the fish, the cow, probably even 5%, but 95% is plant-based. So, and you go deep into some of our Bantu philosophies that clearly outline very clearly that human beings are not supposed to eat meat. Like, for instance, if let's talk about the Mashona cosmology, the story of creation among the Shona people of Zimbabwe. The Shona people, they say God is called Muari, and they say Muari sent the first man on earth called Musikavani. And then one of the things he instructed Musikavani is that people people should live by all plants, but they must not touch any animals. Now, that is from indigenous African spirituality, indigenous African ontology, indigenous African cosmology, that when they tell of the stories of their creation and the stories of their beginning, is that one of the things they were told in the beginning to avoid was meat eating. So it is not something that really came up with the Rastafari culture of Jamaica of 1930. Right. It's something that has always been within the African culture. Now, we need to always remember that part. When we say Rastafari is African, we must understand that most of the practices that we practice in Rastafari, they were already existent in African culture before 1930, before the coronation, before Leonard Howell, Nathaniel Hibbert, Archibald Dangley, Robert Hines came up and declared Rastafari as we know it in the Western Hemisphere. And we must also remember that the Rastafari in the West are the Africans, whose origin is only one place, but the continent of Africa. Now, some of the things they evolved them, they are not Jamaican. They're just some African things that remain latent in their own mind, in their own memory. They are coded in their genetic memory. Yes, they just you do certain things without necessarily giving explanation why you behave the way you behave. And then I come to America and say, Jack Daniel, you go on like my brethren, 1, 2, 3, and I point out 10 different traits that you do, which are very similar to somebody who does in Africa. Because we are not Africans because we are born in Africa, we are Africans because Africa is born in us. You're not necessarily an African because you are in the continent of Africa. You are African even in the West. It's something that is in you. They carry it with you. You might be deprived of the language to articulate it, which is the language is a door to culture. The language is a carrier of the people's concepts, ideas, and principles. You might be deprived of the language to articulate that particular phenomena, but that phenomena is deeply encoded in you. Now, this is the part we need to be very clear about, that Africans were the same at home and abroad. And some of the practices are the same. The only problem is this thing of trying to, which emanate from our own tribalism and territorialism, and try to say, oh, this is Jamaican, and try to pick up yourself. But listen, things that we can point them to be Jamaicans, they're Africans. They are found somewhere in the continent of Africa before there was even people called Jamaicans, or the Africans called Jamaicans, because Jamaicans were the Arawak Indians. I remember in 2017, we were in Ethiopia, and I was sitting with a couple of Jamaican-born Rasta women like Mama Empress Mother Moses, Mama Missy, and some of them. So I opened a bottle of cold drink with another bottle. You use a bottle to open a bottle. And then immediately they say, wow, you are Jamaican. I'm thinking, what? This is what every South African does, And we open a bottle with a bottle. So you see cultural similarities. Yes. That you do certain things that you do in the West and we do it here in the continent, and nobody told you to do it, and probably we might arrive at different explanations for them. But the truth is, we are one people, and we've always been one people. It's only when division come among us that we start to think that, oh, Jamaicans and so forth. And this thing creates reactions because if you can notice, Rastafari in Africa, in South Africa, majority of ones, when they become Rastafari, they turn Jamaican. They start to speak patois.
Yes,
they start to imitate Jamaican cultural practices. They're putting some towel in their back pocket, even though they come from a colder environment, because that's the tradition will get it in a hot environment like Tanzania, where people are sweating a lot. So they always have a towel in their back pocket. And I've been to Jamaica in 2016. I spent 3 weeks there, and I saw the same thing that the Tanzanians do, the same thing Jamaicans do. The sugarcane juice, a whole lot of things. There are a lot of similarities because we are one people. But because of division is deeply entrenched in us, we are too quick to try to say, Miss Naya being, Miss Bobo. As far as let's talk about Bobo Shanti. Bobo Shanti is the amalgamation of two major African tribes, the Bobos from Burkina Faso and the Ashanti from Ghana. Now, when you talk of Bobo Ashanti, we're talking about the combination of two major African tribes. The only problem is you are not doing what those tribes were doing. You're trying to explain whatever you're doing through the Bible, but the Ashanti and the Bobos, they never use the Bible to make reference of what they are doing as the Bobos and the Ashanti people. So, no African spirituality is contained in a book. There is no such thing. Ours is an oral tradition from mouth to ears, and we immortalize and keep these things in songs, in dance, in wood carving, in our sculptures, in our poetry, in our music. That is why for the Africans, religion is a poetic state of mind. If I'm going to do for you an African prayer in my indigenous African language, and if you understand the language, it's a pure poetry, nothing less, nothing more. So it is a man praising the cosmos, the sun, the moon, the stars, because ours is a natural and a mystical religion or spirituality that reverence the heavens. So my point here is that the things we are trying to look at them in Africa that are in Rastafari, and the things that we try to look at them in the West that are in Rastafari that come from Africa, they are only evidence of the fact that we are same people and we carry some of these things. Some of us we left with the meaning because we retain the language so we can explain. And those in the West, they forgot the language, so they are using other means like the Bible to try to explain something that is not even biblical.
Yes, So wow. It's so heavy. It's such a long conversation, an ongoing conversation that needs to be had between the Africans on the continent who never had to leave and the ones who have been brought to the West. And it's not to say that every African in the West is, into the Bible, or that every Rasta in the West is into the Bible, or that every African on the continent is into their tribal, their ethnic language or culture or all of that. We're all mixed up, and we all forgot.
No, we are mixed up. We're mixed up, my brother. I always say when I explain that, I can talk. I talk. I'm trained to talk. I have a personal library of about 500 books. I'm a Rasta polygamist. When I start practicing polygamy, most of the structures of Rastafari are monogamous, so they have to keep me on court in their own kangaroo court, asking me questions. So I'm trained to explain. I've been explaining for the past 28 years or so and talking. But I always say that as much as I can talk the whole night and the whole day, as much as I can post, like if I want to post stuff on Facebook, I can post like every now and then because I have a lot of things to say. But I always say I don't talk too much because I think I'm holy or perfect. I talk too much because I have something to say.
Yes, sir.
Because I've been to 16 countries. I've sit in the feet of the masters. I've learned from the Mau Mau elders, the Kikuyus. I've studied in Ethiopia for 2 years. I've got a scholarship. So I have a lot of things to say. I have a personal library of about 500 books. I have books. I have documentaries. So I have a lot of things to say. I'm a grandmaster. I'm a teacher. I have my institutions that I teach. But I also am a leader within the Rastafari community. But the fact that I can talk the whole 24 hours, it doesn't mean to say I'm holy, I'm perfect, I'm righteous. No, I just happen to be learned. But this doesn't make me a better person than you or any other brother who cannot say what I say. No, I just happen to have focused my mental powers into something else, which you have focused on something else. You know things that I don't know. You know, as much as I might know things that you don't know. Right. And that is where we have to understand we need one another. And I can talk about all of these things. I am still not better than anybody. I'm just privileged to know some other things and focus my mind on them. But equally so, you know things that I do not even begin to understand them. I mean, I can't operate the computer probably the same way as you do. You know, I can't do what you do as your professional work. You know, so, and that is why it's enough respect. You must always respect one another all the time.
Yes, and you know what I'm getting to is that, you know, being that we, because of imperialism, colonialism, white supremacy, racism, whatever you want to call it, all of us, no matter where we are, we've lost some aspects of ourselves, or if we didn't lose anything, like say for instance the ones who were brought to the West, into America and England and things like that, we've because of the industrialism of the European countries, we've been privy to get certain education and training and things that maybe ones who live in a rural setting in Africa might not have gotten. So, you know, of course, there's things that we both need to share with one another. But what I wanted to say is that we have to be patient and understanding and know that, you know, we all went through the Ma'afa and we all went through colonialism, whether we were on the continent or off of the continent. We suffered through that. We went through it. We're still going through some phases of it, but we're shaking off. We're getting rid of the chains. Even as we have this conversation, we're getting rid of the chains off of our minds, you know? So we have to be patient and we have to compare information, you know? Because I don't believe that every, say, indigenous culture, tradition is one that we should keep. And I don't believe that every Western tradition is one that we should get rid of. Because there's some things that we've learned in the West that I think can advance us as a people. And there's certain things in our traditions that we definitely need to hold on to for, you know, forever, really, until I don't know when. But, you know, as long as until we find something better. But the point is to do what's best, not what's the oldest, not what's the newest, but what works the best. And that is what best is going to be different for different people in different areas and with different, you know, circumstances and things like this. So, like in our last conversation, and I think even in this conversation, you mentioned that ones who have repatriated from, say, like Jamaica or somewhere outside of Africa to your region have been dismissive of African culture, the traditional culture that's not Bible-based. And that, to me, is a problem. But also, if anyone on the continent, and like in the West, like in America, it's not, I don't believe this, but a lot of people say that, like, Africans from the continent don't like us because, some, like, you know, it's been portrayed in movies and things where they view us as, like, cotton pickers and, you know, just not on the same level because we lost our sovereignty and our, you know, our culture and everything, heritage and all of that. So on both sides of the ocean, we have to look at each other with love and respect for what we've gone through and the fact that we're still here and that our birth rate as a people still continues to grow while that of the Europeans still continues to decrease. So we're resilient. We have to be respectful, patient, and we have to be willing to learn from one another and, you know, treat each other as brother and sister and not as enemies or distant strangers or anything like that. So we give thanks for the eye taking the time to elaborate and articulate your experience and what you know from experience, not just from what you read, but it's grounded in the fact that you've grown up in this and you can speak from, you know, a direct personal experience and expound on this. It really gives me a lot of inspiration, and it's like, sometimes, like in my analysis personally of Rastafari, I think, I like how you feel about the Bible. I have those same thoughts. Like, I know the Bible isn't the end all be all when it comes to spirituality, or spiritual practice, but it's what we've had. It's like the tools that we were given when we were here in the West. It was the plantation life, the church, the Bible, and whatever came with all of that we had to make do with and make the best out of. So, like, say for King Emmanuel of the Bobo Shanti to call himself Bobo and Ashanti, while it from your perspective it doesn't add up, but it's like it's someone using what they remember in the genetic memory bank to put together pieces that were, so distantly spread out. And so, it's our attempt at reclaiming our Africanness. And when we reach back home, and even before we reach home, through internet and, WhatsApp and things, we can talk to one another and begin the conversation. And once we get to actually repatriate and stand on the land and, hold hands and treat each other like brother and sister, then we can really finalize that completion of our Africanness if we have an open heart and an open mind, and we're willing to come and be in a position where we're learning and not just like I'm teaching you how to be Rastafari or how to be African, but we're learning from one another, So this conversation is very, very meaningful to me, and I hope that the listeners are also able to take a lot of this valuable information that the I has shared, General ThauThau, and incorporate it into their lives, and even to start, because one conversation, it just opens up all of these new things that we didn't know about, and now we can start to research these different ideas, like Ethiopianism. I had never heard of that in the continent. I never knew that existed. And, a lot of the different concepts that you put down, it's like now I have a whole bunch of different subjects to even start to look into. Each time you learn something new, it just lets you know that's one more thing that you know nothing about. So, again, I would just like to give thanks for the eye for sharing so much, and I don't know if there was anything else. If I didn't want to cut you off, if there was something that you wanted to complete, or if there's any other ideas that you wanted to definitely get through to the audience in this particular interview. But I definitely want to continue the conversation at another point. But, we got to, for the sake of time, we have to wrap it up at some point. So, the floor is yours.
Well, give thanks, Daniel, and the listeners. Basically, in conclusion, I will say it is true. I agree fully with everything that you just said. And this is the way to go for us as Africans, even to have our own continental or global social cohesion. But in my conclusion, I can only say that the day the saints and sinners debate in Rastafari end, the day we stop having these saints and sinners, we and them, holy and the unholy, the profane. But this is a problem. Even in South Africa right now, we got visited by the 7 ancients, some they call them the Sizzler ancients from Jamaica, which makes them basically South Africa right now to have the largest assembly of the ancients of Rastafari outside of Jamaica. But they brought with them everything that is non-African, fighting among themselves. And then you have junior niggas, who is the only Rasta, and the rest of us are not Rasta unless he says so. He believes he's a Rastafari certifying body. He decides who's Rasta and who's not. Now, the day this type of reasoning ends, the day we stop having we and them, true Rasta and false Rasta talk, then that is the day we are going to fulfill our historical mandate, because Rastafari is beyond all of these ambiguities. It is beyond all of these separations that we come up with. That, okay, because I'm born in the continent, I'm better, or because one come from the West and he speaks English is better, and so forth. Now, the day these things stop, last year we were at the Rastafari Continental Council Summit in Ghana, and one of the mama who always rub it on us, she stood up, and she's been doing it several times, and she said the strongest Africans were taken out of Africa. So implying that the rest of us who are left in the continent here are the weakest. Now, I stood up and asked her that, because I'm a philosopher, I'm not a theologian, so I don't believe in nothing, So I ask that adversely, maybe let's reverse what you are saying. What if we say that the strongest ran away and they could not be captured by the slave master, and the weakest were the one who could not run it fast, and then they got captured? What if we try to look at this thing from that perspective? Because you are looking at it from your own narrow perspective that you were the strongest captured. How did the strongest get captured? You know, the same thing I was asking the other day, that Nigeria had about 386 tribes. And how did we get enslaved when Nigeria today is dominating everywhere? You know, in terms of crime, Nigerians are running Johannesburg. They are running it literally. You understand me? They're running South Africa. They are insulting us as much as they want. So there are certain things that happen that really question pan-Africanism among ourselves. But this thing is that the day we stop the saints and sinners debate, the day we stop the we and them debate, they are better, we are not better, we are better, they are not better. Once we stop that and have a holistic look of ourselves, like as Rastafari we say, I and I. This I and that I is the same I. I have to see you. The God in me must recognize the God in you, and both of us, we maintain the I divinity. I think we still need to have an evolution, because I've heard in Ethiopia, when I was studying there, I've heard in 2004, some of the brethren reasoning there, one of them was asking, why are you treating this Oromo youth so bad? And then he went like, these Africans, they sold us, I must be careful of them, they will sell you again. So we still have that thing that some they look at us as those who sold them. But the reality is, in South Africa, slavery never took place. No one in South Africa sold no one in the West. It's a history. Basically, the slaves we have in South Africa were taken from Malaysia, which created what they call the Cape Colours. Majority of the Cape Colours, they have Malaysians and have Africans and have all of that different groups. So the transatlantic slave trade was very specific. It was not everywhere in Africa. It was in certain places like West Africa. That is why you can still find the big slave castles in Ghana. You don't find no slave castles around here in some other place, because it never did take place. So we need to stop generalizing and stop looking at all Africans as potential sellouts who sold you to slavery and who will sell you again. It's a wrong conversation we're having among ourselves, which creates this thing that we are having now, a fight among ourselves. Like Rastafari is a movement at war with itself, mainly on these principles of holier than thou, self-sanctimoniousness, and this artificial glory and glorification. So once we transcend this thing and we get into the core of what it is for us to be us, then we will solve all the problems. Give thanks, Rastafari.
Rastafari, my Lord, that was, the reasoning today was very, very beneficial, and I really hope that the ones who listen and hear it as a viewer really take this information in, and just listen with a clear conscience, because there's so many bridges to build, so much more unity and love we need to have for one another. And it starts with getting to know one another. As long as we don't know each other, we can't really love each other. So,
That's true.
Again, General ThauThau, I would like to extend so much thanks. And again, would love to congratulate the eye on the, your new life, your new son. And I pray for our prosperity and his future, that he can, be the next leader of South Africa, And again, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And, give thanks to Jah, Rastafari, for giving us this space and this time to share with one another and to bridge the gap. So, again, give thanks again, Rastafari.
Give thanks, my Lord, Rastafari.
Yes.